Hello, my name's Tom Hiles. I work for Scott's Timber Engineering. And this afternoon, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Nick Boulton. And we're just going to talk about timber supply in the UK over the last couple of months and how we see that going in the future. From Scott's point of view, it's been very much up and down, both with prices and with availability. Nick, from a wider perspective for the rest of the industry, what are your thoughts on what it's been since basically the start of the pandemic, I suppose?
I think it's important to understand where our timber supplies come from. And roughly a third of the wood that we use in the construction sector comes from within the UK itself. That means that the other 2/3 are imported, principally from Northern and Central Europe, with countries like Sweden, Finland, Latvia, Germany and Austria being our main suppliers. Realistically, since about 2008, when we left the financial crisis, the supply position for structural timber has been very stable. Until we got to 2020, we'd never seen any significant shortages. So I think it was the COVID crisis that really triggered those shortages. And there are lots of reasons underlying that. But I think it's entirely down to the unprecedented demand that we saw from consumers during the first lockdown, which really kicked the situation off. That effectively sucked all of the material out of the UK supply chain and meant that all of the material coming in was already pre-ordered, and that meant that there was nothing left on the ground. That obviously created quite a challenging situation for all timber importers and distributors, but also for all our customers as well.
From Scott's perspective, if you take the middle of last year, we were being told that we were going to be receiving some timber, and then that will be delayed, and that will be delayed. So it wasn't just the delay, though. The price would increase almost on a week by week basis, and this went on for absolutely months. So it was very difficult to keep our customers informed of what was going on, and also make predictions of what the charges were going to be further down the line on uplifts.
Yeah, it was a very challenging situation for everyone, really. I think, Tom, the position in the UK was that we saw a rapid increase of demand, and as I said, that took all of the material out of the supply chain. That was then closely followed by both European countries and global markets all seeing a similar uplift in demand. And that effectively meant that there were an increasing number of buyers chasing a fixed amount of wood. And I think that's the point that we have to remember in terms of sustainability. Wood is a sustainable product. And the reason it's sustainable is because we're only taking out of the forest what is being replaced. The problem with that is that it's very difficult to cope with sudden massive jumps in demand, which is what we saw during COVID. So that limited supply is then being chased by an increasing number of buyers, and inevitably that forces the price upwards. And I think that situation was exaggerated by the logistics issues that we also saw because people were off with COVID. That meant that crews on vessels, that meant that HGV drivers and also staff at sawmills were all absent for some of the time, which made it really difficult to increase the supply of wood that was available to the UK. And that's why you saw deliveries getting kicked further down the line. And inevitably being pushed further down the line meant that then the prices were forced upwards. I don't think it was until we got around until Q3 2021 that the available stock on the ground in the UK began to increase. And as soon as that happened, we saw prices stabilising as we came into Q4 last year.
I totally agree. I mean, it got to about September time. I mean, we were doing our best at Scott's to keep our customers as informed as they possibly could do, but our production schedule really was able to kick in, and we will be able to give accurate delivery predictions in September. And some of these had been originally promised in sort of like June, July time, but if you haven't physically got the timber, it's obviously impossible to deliver product. So yeah, that makes absolute sense. I completely agree.
Yeah, I think by the end of Q3 last year, there was plenty of wood in the wood supply chain, and I think since then we've returned to a much more stable position. And I think as we've come into 2022, wood supply is now much more stable.
How do you see things are at the moment? I mean, as you've just said, it does feel, from our point of view, from Scott's point of view, that things are feeling a lot more settled. Prices seem to be, dare I say it, slightly falling. So yeah, from a wider perspective, what do you see now?
Certainly the supply position is much more stable. The news that we have from the Swedish sawmills, for instance, suggests that their production is very strong at the moment. They have stocks on the ground, and there are available ships to move those goods over to the UK. So I think the position is currently very good, and there's plenty of wood in the supply chain. So I certainly don't see any short-term shortages. That also has an impact on price. So because there's plenty of stock on the ground, I certainly think that the prices have started to fall. And when we look at some of the import price indexes, we'll see that they've fallen, that they fell quite strongly at the back end of last year. They firmed a little bit in Q1, but I think they've began to fall a bit since. So I think certainly, although there are a lot of macroeconomic factors and global factors such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine going on in the background, I think from a structural wood point of view, they don't really influence the supply of wood coming to the UK for structural timber purposes. So I think we're going to see the rest of this year, there'll certainly be plenty of wood available at a reasonable price. But in terms of prices, the one thing I think we ought to say is that a lot of people are looking back to the prices that they were paying at the end of 2019 and asking if we're going to go back to that level. Well, I think realistically the answer has to be no. The price at back end of 2019 was really the lowest point we'd seen since 2007. So realistically, we're not going to go back there. It will stabilize, but it will be at a higher price level, probably around the kind of levels that we're beginning to see now, I would have thought.
Okay, yeah, no, that's interesting. It is one of the two main questions we get asked by our customers. The other one, which I think is more realistic of being able to do, and from my point of view, is great, is people are asking how long are you going to be able to hold your prices? And I think over the last 18 months, the answer to that is, I don't know, being completely honest. And when we have at the start of this year, as you said, the prices were leveling out at the end of last year. And, we moved into January and we were turning around to people and saying, well, our customers and saying, hoping Q1, Q2, and then the unfortunate goings on in Ukraine, that completely changed. It changed everything again. And I think finally we're coming back around to a point where we can start offering those reassurances. It's just, do you think that, going back to the good old days where we can say we can hold these prices for a year, do you think we're there yet, or am I getting a little bit excited?
I think given the global situation, that's probably a bit optimistic. But I think realistically, because there's wood products on the ground, there's plenty of stock available. If somebody gave you an order for 6 months' time, theoretically you could buy that wood at today's price and hold it in stock. And that was the problem last year, was that even if you wanted to buy the wood, you couldn't get it. You could only get a limited amount. So I think this year you've got the opportunity to buy ahead if you want to. And you can either take that into your own stock, or you've got a much more realistic chance of working with your supplier and getting a price that's fixed for 3 or 6 months ahead. As I said, going a year ahead, that's always going to be difficult. And I think actually what we need to do to some extent is return to the situation that we had before the financial crisis in 2007. The the players in the supply chain were much more realistic about price at that point, and so they weren't fixing themselves so far ahead into the future, which for wood and wood products is unrealistic. I mean, if you speak to a plumber about whether they can fix a price for copper pipe into the future, they'll tell you very much, no, you can't, because it's a commodity product. And I think wood realistically has to be viewed in that way. So no, we can't predict exactly what prices are going to be, but they will certainly be much more stable than they have been over the last 18 months.
If any house builders are watching this, just interested in your thoughts of what to do in the future, you know, now moving into 2023 on securing, you know, supply chain resilience. We've, you know, from Scott's point of view, we've been contacting any of our customers, new, old, and asking them to give us their production schedules as soon as they possibly can, so that we can get timber on board and make sure there isn't going to be any slippage. But is there anything that you would advise, or tips that you could give from that point of view?
No, I think that point you've made there, Tom, is an excellent one. It's about cooperation along the supply chain, and I think that's the thing that's really come out strongly in terms of the COVID crisis and how we've managed to get through it. Is that realistically, the wood supply chain and the construction supply chain that it goes into, we've got to work more in partnership going forward, you know, because if we're constantly competing against one another, then that's really a no-win situation. You know, if we can work together in terms of product availability and product demand, that makes life much easier for all of us. And that also makes prices much more stable, because if people can predict in advance what the demand's going to be, they can more realistically set out their logistics schedules, their shipping schedules, their production schedules, and therefore that makes potentially the prices much more stable. So I think going forward, it really is very much about cooperation, you know, and the more of that we can do, the better, really.
Well, Nick, I'm really grateful for your time today. That's been incredibly interesting, and in some ways it's been nice to be backed up to know that we're maybe doing the right thing in a few points. But thanks very much for your time this afternoon.
It's a pleasure, Tom. Great to talk to you. And if we can help with anything more in the future, let me know.
Will do. Thanks.